These are volumes 4 and 5 of the complete Love and Rockets, Tears from Heaven and House of the Raging Women. And I normally like to do a recap video as I read each volume, but I realized I hadn't done one for 4 and I had just finished 5 recently. So I'm going to do both. Starting with number 4, Tears from Heaven. What I'm going to do with these videos is that there's so many short stories in this one. There's a lot of, like, not usually in the previous volumes have been mostly main, large, long arcs. And this is more of like a lot of smaller stories, but that do a lot of background building and character development. But I just wanted to mention a few of the stories here that kind of really caught my eye or had the most impact to me. The first one was Stigmata. This is sort of like the origin of Errata Stigmata. And this is one of the darkest stories I've read, and I wasn't expecting this level of darkness from a Love and Rockets comic, just because I mean, I know they have a lot of different genres within comics that they explore, but this is really dark. It starts off with a gruesome murder scene, has a baby in the crib, and then the next panel is, explains that her parents were killed and therefore she went to live with her aunt and uncle. The uncle means well, he's a wealthy businessman, but he's kind of like a buffoon. And then he goes away to business a lot, so then she's raised by her aunt. And the aunt is insane. And I had to put some post-it notes here because early on, she has her sit in a room watching her have sex with one of her lovers while her husband's away on business. And she's saying, oh, you have to understand how life begins. Then the next couple pages are, she goes to the local morgue and has her locked in with a cadaver because she has to understand what death is. It's really weird psychological torture that I'm surprised flew in the 80s. To me, it's some of the most darkest stuff I've ever read. I mean, I know there were things like Tim Vigil's work and other things that were gory. And we've had Red Room in the past few years but that was just like torture porn. This is like really dark because it features a child. I mean, you couldn't get away with this. In my opinion, you couldn't get away with this today. The next scene shows Errata having a piano lesson with a really physically and mentally abusive piano teacher, and that's where she first develops the stigmata. And if you know what stigmata is some people claim to have open wounds like here in the palm and around their ankles, the same spots where Jesus Christ was nailed to the cross. So to me, I've always felt it's like one of those things like exorcism where it allegedly exists, but there's really no proof and nobody will say either way if it does or not. So it just goes on a few more pages, and then eventually the uncle's like, hey man, you know what? We've had enough, so I'm gonna take you away to someplace safe. And then they end up with this thing called Stigmaticon. And it's sort of, I think, like a satire on cons, because these are all people that really believe that they have some kind of like illness that's religious related. But you think there's things like a lot of fakers. And then she's here, meets someone her age, gets along, and then the uncle takes you to a train and says, listen, you're gonna go to a school, everybody's gonna be nice to you. Don't worry, I'm gonna be there soon. And so he sends her off on a train, and she's sad because she really does love her uncle because he's the only one that's really genuinely nice to her. And then he goes on the way home, he buys a pistol, shoots his wife dead, shoots her 2 lovers dead, and then shoots himself dead. And then you have this little girl alone on a train. End of story. It's just really dark. That was like the first story, and I didn't even like expecting it. It didn't offend me or anything. It's just more like, whoa. Then thematically it changes because there's 3 shorter stories featuring Penny Century. And up until now, we really haven't gotten a lot, at least with the collected volumes, a lot of insight on her. And I have to find that she's probably the most frustratingly inconsistent and contradictory personality that I've seen so far in this comic, because she's part of the gang with Maggie and Hopi and Izzy. And, she's a really attractive woman, kind of gives a sex kitten vibe. And she knows she's attractive, and she gets guys to do things for her because they just see how beautiful she is, and they just do whatever she says. But then when guys basically just show that they're only interested in her because of her beauty, she gets offended because it's sort of like, well, I want you, she wants to be respected for her mind. But you really can't have both. You kind of, you can be an attractive person and be respected for your mind, but if you're going to use your attractiveness to get what you want, then most people are not just going to take you seriously. That's male or female. So and that's like a running theme here, where she leaves her boyfriend, who can give her anything she wants, and then like gets mad when he like calls her out and says, hey, basically you're just like my eye candy. And then this is a second story featuring her, where she's talking about how she first met Rand Race. This is kind of like a prequel to the story that Maggie had in Volume 2. And here she has Rand as this really dirty, scruffy guy working in the sewers before he became a pro solar mechanic, or when she didn't know who he was. And then later on, she's walking down the street and she sees being interviewed by someone. And then she just jumps in, and she kind of like acts like she's his girlfriend in front of the camera so she can get some, go viral kind of. And again, it's like, she's like, oh, I'm going to jump in and just so I can, raise some ruckus and get some, word of mouth going. Very strange. Or just say inconsistent. And the last one here that I want to feature is a third Penny Century story where she's with her boyfriend, H.R. Costigan. I don't know why he has these devil horns, but he's like the richest guy in the world. And they're on this island, and she's like, hey, I want to earn my own money. I can do stuff. And he's like, hey, listen, without me, man, you're like you're like window dressing. And so she gets mad because she wants to be able to do stuff, and then they make up. So she wants it both ways, and that doesn't really work in the real world. I mean, it's just kind of strange. And I have to take as a testament to Hyman's writing that he can draw a character that's just so frustratingly inconsistent that you actually get a reaction out of it. And the last story I want to mention is Locos. This is a story with Speedy and a friend, and they're kind of giving some of the backstory with Izzy, because up until now, Izzy's just been this weird family member. She's got her hair all scraggly. She doesn't like going out in the sunlight. Very reclusive. And then he kind of explains that, well, when she was young, she was part of a gang. Then she got herself cleaned up. And then she went to college. She learned how to write. She married one of her professors. Then a year later, she was divorced. She spent a year in Mexico. They got one postcard. When she came back, as a shell of herself. And you don't get until issue 29, that famous issue, the one with the rooster on the cover, where you kind of find out what happened to her in that year in Mexico and why she is the way she is. But I found this interesting because you just think, if you're reading it probably for the first time and you don't know about future events, you're just thinking, I wonder what happened. But then later on, when you find that backstory, you're like, oh man, that's a whole backstory. So that was, for me, the highlights of Volume 4. I mean, all of it was good. There was a lot of character building, not only with the Hoppers universe, but also with Palomar. But it was just a lot of just character building and filling in the blanks and adding a little bit more depth and nuance to the characters. And with Volume 5, House of the Raging Women, this to me had a lot more meat as far as like, it had your backup fill-in stories, but it seemed like 4 kind of collected all the other stuff that had been published in the previous 3 volumes, and now this is like where they kind of start going and start putting a lot more stuff in here as far as famous serialized stories or really interesting ones. So the first one I kind of want to talk about is this one, An American in Palomar. And this is a really interesting story because it's basically this American photojournalist comes to Palomar. He's looking at taking pictures of the locals, and he wants to sell it as, a book. You know, like a lot of American photographers do. They'll go to an impoverished country and they'll take pictures of the people and they'll show them, and they kind of like try to show them nobility even though like they're poor, that kind of trope. And that's been done forever. And it's interesting because it's not just him trying to get this book, it's also how all the locals react to this American. Like, for instance, Tonantzin sees this guy and thinks it's her ticket to Hollywood. And then she imagines herself in that famous Marilyn Monroe pose. He meets up with Luba and he's like, hey, I'd like to take pictures of you and your family. And she's thinking, oh, great, you know, I can, you know, we can all get dressed up and have a nice picture taken of ourselves. This is like a really nice opportunity. Then he goes into, oh, I forget her name. She's like a runner and she's really fast, and he's timing her and he's telling her how fast she is. And he thinks that based on her time speed and what he's taken, that she maybe she's, you know, she's like breaking official records. So she thinks she's like one of the fastest people on the planet. And then later on, this kid takes you to this temple. This sort of like a Buddha, sort of like a frog. And in it, he's going exploring, and then he starts hearing voices. Someone says, "What the hell do you think we are, a freak show?" And then someone says, "Do you have any plans of taking Tonantzin with you, or go back? You leave a woman alone, you effing gringo." And then he's in there and he hears all this stuff, and he's like, "Stop!" And he kind of like has this like panic attack, and he's wondering kind of what happened. And then you have the females that are like reacting to this guy, thinking that this guy might be like a way to get out of their mundane, boring lives stuck in Palomar. So it cuts to here, he's doing this photo shoot with Tonantzin, and then he ends up like having sex with her. And Luba's getting the family all dressed up and really nicely done up so that way they can have pictures taken. And when she meets him, he's like, okay, we're here. And he's like, oh no, I didn't want you all dressed up and looking good. I wanted you to kind of be as you were. Like his idea was like, I want you looking disheveled and look like crap because that might be more effective for his book. That's what he's thinking. And then she's upset. She's like, you know, what? You want us to look terrible and have pictures printed in a book that's all over the world? And then here she says, well, what do you think we are, a freak show? Which is one of the things that you hear, that he's heard here in that temple. And you'll find that the things he hears in that temple are said by characters later on. So it's almost like this temple is like giving him, it's sort of like chastising him and bringing some of the words that he's going to hear in the future based on his decisions. So Luba gets pissed off and it's like, oh, forget this. And then he tells Tonantzin, hey, listen, I really can't take you back with me. Like, I promise. I got to go to Russia. He makes up some excuse. So, you know, she's kind of like heartbroken, disappointed. And then the guys see her all saddened about what happened. And, you know, her family's telling her, yeah, you know, what do you expect from this guy? Of course, he just led you on and used you. One of the local youths hears this, tells the other guys, so they come to his, the photographers where he's staying at, they beat the crap out of him. And then he says, go back home and S on your own women, you effing gringo. Which again, is another one of these things that he heard in the temple. Kind of interesting when you go back and read it. That's why I like reading these collections, because you don't have to go to a previous issue. You can just read the story in one go and it stays fresh in your mind. And here he's even thinking about, oh, I'm going to win this award and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, because he thinks he's a serious artist. So anyway, he leaves, and it's funny because I think it's Diana. She says, like, I'm the fastest because this guy's been telling her she's the fastest. So she's going to race, and then Tonantzin beats her in a race, and she's like, come on, let's go. And then this is where she realizes that she's been lied to by this American in Palomar. And it's a lot like these, and it's true, like I said, a lot of these photojournalists would go to these impoverished countries. And I think in a way it's a lot like when Americans come into a poor country and they promise a lot of things and then they leave and they really don't deliver on a lot of the promises they gave. They impact the people, but and the American just moves on. And that's probably true for like other countries that are like colonizers, kind of, you know, like Canada and the French and the Germans, those sorts of things. So it's an interesting story. I really like this story quite a bit. It showed a lot of Beto's ability to write and just sort of string together a really well thought out, well done story. Let me see. There's a couple other stories that I wanted to mention. Give me a moment to look at my notes. Okay, here. Okay. Okay. One of the subplots is that Maggie's cousin, Reina Titañón, is a former wrestler. And earlier in the book, she talks about how she's going to go back and get her title. And I really get a smile out of how Jaime treats wrestling, because there are male professional wrestlers, but he really focuses on the women. And he treats wrestling like he really believes in kayfabe. And I don't know what any of you know about kayfabe, but it isn't the way that cartoonist kayfabe implied it was. Kayfabe was a corny term, meaning that you did not, it was keeping the illusion that the events that you're seeing are unscripted as real. So I love how he treats wrestling like that. Like, they really are wrestling. They're not going in the back, going over the match, calling the match in the ring. They're not going over a script. They really are wrestling, and they're cheating, and it's like a real legitimate athletic competition versus a scripted performance. And it's a good story because it goes a lot about her rivalry with her former tag team partner. And then earlier on, there's this rumor that Reina had a kid, and she kind of denies it. But then later on, you see this figure in black. I don't know if it's her ex-husband or it's a trustee, but he said, look, I saw you were doing the ring while you're still wrestling. You know, I'm not going to let your son see you. Your son knows. So at the end, she's by herself, and it's sort of like that, you know, what do you give up to chase your kind of dreams of glory? And is it really worth it? It's sort of like that, the themes that were in the Wrestler and Black Swan, where it's like, what would you do for your art? But the one thing I wanted to mention here is that the main characters are here in this back dressing room, and then here you have Tonantzin and Vicente from Palomar just sitting here and watching. All of a sudden, they're just here. They're interacting in the story, but it's just the first time that I've seen where a Palomar character in a Jaime story. And you see it later on too, because you see it, you'll see Hopi in a Palomar story. The next story that I liked a lot was, let me get to it, I'm sorry. Twitch City. And the reason why I like Twitch City is that this story follows Jesus. Jesus is a character that was in an earlier story that he had an argument with his wife. He started throwing things around by accident. His baby's crib fell over and the baby fell. So then he ran out. So some of the friends picked him up, and then eventually, for that or whatever other reasons, he was put in jail. So this is him being in jail. So you know, it shows him how he's dealing with that life of being in jail, where he's just walking around and then he's having fantasies of being with Luba. And then you can tell that this is like a flashback sequence, kind of, because he's like imagining that he's having sex with Luba, but then he says, oh, when we get married, and she's like, but Jesus, we're already married. And it's his wife, Carmen. So I'm not sure if there's a flashback or this is sort of like a dream where you think you're doing something with one person, you end up with another. But they talk about just how, and it shows how he fantasizes with all these different women to kind of get through the day of being in prison. And there's this one sequence where a guy says, hey man, I got an escape plan. If you're interested, let me know. And then here he's just fantasizing again, and he's fantasizing with Tonantzin. And I mean, and so he's fantasizing with her to kind of get through the day, and then he's having flashbacks when he sleeps of the incident. This is the first time that you see it where they argue, and they argue a lot, and then he's screaming, he's throwing stuff, the baby falls out, and then he hides, and then eventually he's arrested, and then he's thrown in jail. And then later on, it shows how he just keeps doing stuff to shoot himself in the foot as far as when he's in prison. And then here he's just fantasizing about his wife Carmen, because when she was pregnant, he was really turned on, but it seemed like after she had the baby, he lost interest. So he's desperate enough, like, hey, I gotta get out of here. And he goes to his friends, where his friends are, their cell. Hey, listen, you talked about an escape plan, and then you see this guy hung, and this is the shadow. So like the guards knew that he was trying to escape, and then he's trying to get through the day, and then he's having more and more fantasies about all these women that he wants to have. And it's really interesting because Love and Rockets features a lot of really strong-willed, strong women. But most of the guys seem really flawed, which is different in comics, period, especially for ones, created by men. But it's just kind of funny, this running theme where most of the men are like flawed and they're losers. And most of the women, some of them are flawed and they're whatever, but they're strong. They're not going to take a lot of shit. It's just an ongoing theme that I found interesting. And, oh, here's the Hopi cameo and Gilbert Palomar story. And then this just kind of shows more background stories of the characters in Palomar. These all have the covers printed in black and white. I have the Love and Rockets, the covers book, so I could see them in color, but these are not all the issues that the stories came from, but these are the issues that the bulk of the stories came from. And just really great design work here. Just really fascinating stuff. And that's really it. Oh, one thing I want to mention. I love this back cover because the characters in Palomar, they're all darker skinned, or almost all of them, I guess, are darker skinned, various shades. I mean, it's a Central American type of country. You're going to have a lot of indigenous tribes. You're going to have a lot of ancestors from African slaves, what have you. But it's really interesting because when they're drawn here in the black and white, since it's black and white, they're drawn like if they're all white, they're all light skinned, they're all white. But it's here in the color when you see that they are actually people of color and the different shades of color. It's sort of like, oh, that's what they really look like. And I understand why, since you're doing black and white, you really can't do different shades of color because there's no color. But I just thought that was really interesting. So that was it. I think Volume 4 was okay, but then I think Volume 5 picked up to what had been the previous issues. None of it was bad, but as far as stories that really stuck out of my mind, I think 5 had more. And now I'm going to be on Volume 6, which is titled Duck Feet, which I have no idea what that means. So if you like this, let me know. I enjoy comments. I enjoy either being corrected or being informed more about what went behind, because I know that a lot of these stories, sometimes they actually do additional pages, and these are not the same ones as the original comics, and then sometimes in subsequent collections, they'll do even more additional pages or changes. So that kind of stuff that I really enjoy finding out. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks.